Today is part 2 of our 3-part series, Make Your Land Available for Farming. Last week, we talked a little bit just about an introduction to the topic in general and covered some basics. Today, we'll be diving in more to the specifics of different methods and approaches for making your farmland available to a farmer. And next week, we're expecting a panel of visiting speakers, both farmers and landowners. So that's what we're looking for in the next couple of hours. Just a reminder for folks, or if people didn't join us last week, this session is part of the Land for Farmers project, which is supported by the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program grant from the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. So that funding is what is making this series possible. And this group, the New England FarmLink Collaborative, is a partnership of FarmLink programs and farm access providers working all across New England. We provide a variety of farmland access support services, and we also co-manage the New England Farm Finder website, which is one of the sites that lists farm properties and educational resources. And the collaborative is made up of Connecticut FarmLink, Land for Good, Maine FarmLink, and Vermont Land Link. So that's who you're talking to. We'd love to know more about who is in the room today. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and start a poll. You should see a question pop up, and I'll give you each a couple of minutes to answer this question. Tell us more about who you are. And when the majority of folks have had the chance to respond, then I'll show you the results of the poll so you can see who all is here with us today. We're up to 65%. Over 80. I'll just give people maybe another 30 seconds or so to answer the question, and then I'll show you. Interesting to see who's here. So hopefully you should be able to see, we have 43% of folks in the room today are landowners who are not currently farming. And then we also have about 40% of people who either are currently farming, were farming and have retired, or are planning to retire. So that's pretty exciting. We're really glad that you're here. Thank you for participating in the poll. And then before I hand things off to Jay and Nikki, for folks who weren't here last time, or just to remind you, we're in unceded territory. The place where we're talking to you from, New England, is Indigenous land. And if you'd like to find out more about the people that in the past and currently live on and steward your land, I'd recommend this website, native-land.ca. It's pretty interesting and really informative, and gives you the chance to dive into who the stewards of your land are. So that's that from me. And with that, Jay, I'm going to hand it over to you. You should be able to share your screen and walk folks through the next steps.
Great. Thanks so much. And thanks to all of you for joining us. So my name is Jay Silverman. I'm the Massachusetts field agent with Land for Good. So along with what Rachel was saying, Land for Good is a nonprofit that works in all 6 New England states. We've got field agents that help folks in each state. So I live and farm in Conway, Massachusetts, the western part of the state, but I work with farmers and landowners and service providers all across Mass and even around New England to basically help facilitate getting farmers on farmland, helping landowners find farmers, facilitating lease agreements, succession planning, that sort of thing, working with existing farmers and folks looking toward retirement or trying to figure out who their successor is. So do a lot of really meaningful one-on-one work with folks, as well as trainings and workshops like this. But one of the hats that I wear at Land for Good is helping to run the New England Farmland Finder website. So as Rachel mentioned, New England Farmland Finder is run as a collaborative with Vermont Land Link, Connecticut FarmLink, and Maine FarmLink, along with Land for Good. So we'll talk a little bit about that as it fits into the mix here. But basically, the New England Farmland Finder site is a place for farmland opportunities to be posted for farmers to find in New England. And that certainly ranges from properties that are for sale, for lease, other types of arrangements, looking for managers or succession opportunities, really just trying to be a database where we can get properties out in front of folks. And we do that, in collaborative with the other states. So that's been really meaningful. And I've been the site administrator there for a while. So if you've been engaging on the site and posting properties, chances are I've seen it, maybe even corresponded with some of you. And thanks to all of you who've given the site traction and gotten properties up there, as we'll talk about. But otherwise, thanks for being here, and eager to have you learn more.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Nikki Leonard, and I'm a farm business specialist with the Intervale Center. The Intervale Center, we're located in Burlington, Vermont. We do quite a bit of programming around just kind of in general supporting Vermont farms, supporting Vermont lands, engaging community, in our food system. And as a farm advisor, I do get to travel around the state, working with farmers, on their farm financials or business planning, helping them through that farm search if they're aspiring or beginning and looking for that, access to land, or even helping them prep for that farm loan request that they may be needing. And we do also help, like Jay had mentioned, farmers with their farm transfer succession plans, whether they're on the exiting side or the incoming side. And, whatever the project, whatever the farmer, we do get to work one-on-one with them. So the awesome part of, at least how I see it, awesome part of my job, we get to dial in right away to that farmer's needs and goals and hit the ground running. So when talking about these farmland access projects, a chunk of the work that we do, next slide, Jay. Part of our services also include offering land linking support. Just like Jay over at NEF, we manage Vermont Land Link, which is what it's called, Vermont's version of these farm linking websites. Through this website too, folks do have access to the type of, technical assistance that I was talking about in my other role. So whether you find us through this site or just, our organization or the Intervale Center, you'll be able to get that direct support. So today, carrying over from last week's workshop that we had with Sue and Maddie on more of the whys that you'd want to offer your land to farmers. Today, we're going to go over more of the how-tos, right, of making your land available. And when Jay and I put this agenda together, we really tried to keep in mind, that we learned from the poll too, right? That there are many types of landowners. You could be that active farming landowner, the non-active farming landowner, or maybe you have someone right now maybe haying your land for a bit, and maybe you're looking for them or another farmer to bring back livestock or run a veggie operation. And then there's the total non-farming landowner, and all this is new to you. So all of this is great. We're going to try and cover as much as we can with all of you in mind. So we'll be talking leasing your land, finding maybe a farm manager, going through a farm succession or transfer, even just that traditional sale, gifting and rematuration, and the idea of offering your land to group use or collaborative farming you may have heard of. And then, of course, opening it up at the end for questions.
Great. Thanks, Nikki. And we're really lucky in this region to have such a great network of support services, and, work with Nikki and the other members all the time, overlapping support and really helping people figure out this puzzle. So the fact that you're here is great. I'm glad you're here to learn more, and hoping to sort of dive into some of these options. So when it comes to leasing land, often start out by looking at the farmer's perspective. Like I mentioned, I work with folks on both sides of it, work with farmers that are looking for land as well as landowners that are looking for farmers. But from the farmer's perspective, leasing land has some pros and cons to it. And there's various reasons why, specific to leasing, why a farmer might be interested in your land or a piece of land in general. And as I go through this, I would love to hear in the chat if there's any additional ideas that pop to mind, anything that resonates with you or something that maybe didn't make the list here. Please feel free to throw that in the chat. It's always great to have that brainstorm going. So from a farmer's perspective, leasing land, can allow flexibility. It can allow their operation to grow and expand, perhaps relocate, test out markets, and give them, other uses of that startup capital for their business, whether they're expanding or starting something from scratch. Instead of trying to purchase land right away, or even at all, they can use, capital for other operating expenses for their business and to scale up a bit. And, obviously along with that is less debt and, the ability for that farmer to maybe not quite be in as much debt, at least in the beginning or intermediary part of their business. Sometimes it's really the only way they can make their farm viable for their, income and family living if they don't have that carrying cost of the land that we'll talk about a little bit. That's certainly the case for me. I'm a hay farmer in Conway, Massachusetts, and I don't own any of the land that I hay, and that's the only way my business can actually work. If I was trying to take on the carrying costs of that land, at least for hay production, it wouldn't work with the numbers. And sometimes, it's their only option, whether that's financial or whether it's certainly in this bubble right now of, crazy, the way the housing and land market is going. Even if somebody wants to buy land, it's not necessarily available either where they need it or the type they need, or the quantity they need. So there's plenty of people looking to lease land, just sheerly without any other type of option there. But certainly there's some downsides to it. And, from the farmer's perspective, they don't necessarily have as much security to be on that land. I mean, hopefully a written lease can help with that. But, in general, they're there with somebody else's permission and they need to work with somebody else in order to, establish how long they can be there farming that land for. Can definitely be harder to, get equity in assets or the land itself since they don't own it. And depending on the length of the lease, what they do to improve the land, could be lost if the lease ends or if they're not there for as long as they'd like to be. That could be things like infrastructure or improving the land itself through fertility. And of course, there's relationships with landowners that they need to manage. And ask for permission, trying to figure out what's okay to do, what's okay not to do. And extra hoops when they want to look at expanding or pivoting their enterprise, basically. So, if a farmer approaches you and you're interested in leasing your land and you're trying to figure this out, trying to view it from their perspective can help shed a lot of light about why they're there, why they're interested, and what sort of pieces they might be looking at. So from your perspective,
Hey, Jay.
Oh yeah.
We have a comment from one of the
Oh, sure.
participants.
Yep.
In terms of leasing benefits, housing could be considered a benefit to the farmer who's leasing as well.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. If there's housing on the property, that can be a big benefit to folks. Properties are sometimes small, sometimes they're a whole farm, with a house. So absolutely, if there can be a housing component to that and allow a farmer, to be living very close to the land that they're on, that can be a huge piece. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah. So from a landowner's perspective, there's some benefits and drawbacks as well. And again, this is where I'd love to hear from all of you. If you can think of anything else relative to your own situation, certainly as a landowner, if you're looking to lease your land, this is coming from wanting to make your land available for farming, and the benefits of leasing it as a tool for that. Obviously, you get to continue to own your land. You're not giving up ownership of it. It's, whether it's family land, whether it's something you've recently acquired, you get continued legal ownership of that, but hopefully get some aspect of farming done on it. And hopefully that land is in fact, improved or at least managed. So it's a little bit less you have to worry about. It's not entirely up to you to take care of it, make sure that it's has adequate fertility or even mowed, depending on your type of land. And, if what you desire is not having as much work or as much involvement in your land, but you'd like it to be taken care of, that can certainly be a benefit. On the flip side, if you want a lot of input on exactly what happens in your land, you have a lot of vision, you have, really specific practices and even specific crops or anything like that, that could be a drawback to a leasing situation, because in a lease, a farmer's really running their own business, their own farm on your land, and it can certainly be stipulated what they can and can't do. But to a certain point, the farmer needs to be able to do their own thing, make their own decisions, and move forward with their own business. So we'll talk about some other options there. And so, of course, potential for rental income, hopefully. We'll talk about a little bit about that too. And tax benefits, depending on your state and how current use taxes are set up. There's the potential to get reduction on property taxes if it's in farming from someone. But certainly, you have a relationship to manage with a farmer, something that needs constant feedback and adjusting and making sure parties are hearing each other well, and it's understood what the plan is and what can and can't be done. And a lot of times, especially for folks that don't have direct experience with farming or haven't had a farming tenant on their land, there can kind of be a difference between what's expected from having a farmer on your land and what actually happens in reality. And so, that making sure that's thought through and communicated well can be really important. So quickly, there's multiple types of leases that can be considered. The idea of actually having the lease in writing versus being an oral arrangement is actually a really big distinction. A lot of leases are done as handshakes or oral agreements, and that all works fine until something goes awry and then you don't actually have something to fall back on. So we really try to encourage folks, to get something in writing, have some clarity, and then hopefully allow the arrangement to work well and have good communication, but to have something in writing to fall back on. Leases can certainly be, short-term trial leases where somebody's on there for a year or a couple years, or, set up some creative mechanics to allow that short-term to continue without necessarily committing to a large chunk of time, at least to figure out whether it's a good situation, both for the farmer and the landowner. But likewise, plenty of leases can be long-term. The term talking about a long-term lease can be a little bit squishy. Sometimes people mean 5 or 10 years. Other times, you're getting upwards of 20 or 50 or even 99-year leases. And it really is just all a matter of what is the best situation for that landowner and that farmer. What can each party feel like they commit to? And just as long as both parties fully understand that, and the farmer has a good planning horizon to know how long they're guaranteed to be there, and what they can and can't do with the property. And then, of course, somebody mentioned, which I appreciate, the idea of having a residential lease too, whether or not there's a house involved, and whether you're leasing any other pieces from, or whether the farmer's, leasing any other pieces from you, like building, equipment, livestock, that sort of thing. So the nice thing is leases can be really, really malleable and cover a lot of different situations. And that's something we enjoy working with folks on, where, having a lease agreement that really matches those needs of that landowner and that farmer to get some clarity and to get some security. So, a lease really needs these 5 things in order to be considered a lease document. The parties, so who's involved, the premises, where is the property and what are the boundaries of it. The term is how long the lease actually lasts for. Consideration is what's being exchanged, whether that's money, whether that's goods or services, and the signatures. In order to get a minimum for what a lease needs, those are the considerations. But a lot else can go on a lease. And so, most commonly you get into what's actually allowed and what's not allowed on the premises. Some people, feel strongly they want only organic practices to be used. That's pretty common. Other folks sometimes don't want tillage to happen on their property, or want to make sure that cover cropping is utilized, things like that. Big item can certainly be maintenance and repairs. Who's responsible for what if there's infrastructure involved? And trying to get that figured out from the get-go can be really important, because when a window breaks or even a roof needs replacing or things like that, there needs to be a lot of clarity about who's responsible for it. And certainly things with land improvements as well, and what can and can't be done there. Taxes and utilities and these other bits, basically as it applies to your situation, just making sure it's stipulated who's responsible for what and what's the protocol for it, and certainly making sure that communication is clear. But as I mentioned, it can be really creative and really look at what your situation needs, look at what the farmer needs, and try to have some foresight and have some adaptability for the situation. So rental rates, certainly come up a lot with leasing. If trying to get some income for your property, or even just trying to cover some expenses is a consideration for it, then that can sometimes be a big factor. And that's a big question we get, is what does farmland tend to go for? And so unfortunately, the answer is that it varies a lot. And there's often not necessarily a great silver bullet answer for that. It can be really circumstantial, based on what your land has to offer, what the slope is, whether it could be tilled. Those are all things that both Nikki and I and the rest of this group are happy to help you work through for sure if you have questions about your land in particular. But it can also vary a lot depending on infrastructure. And infrastructure is where we tend to see the biggest variation in rental rates. People talk about a greenhouse, but there can be a lot of different types of greenhouses, just as one example. So a lot of times it really comes down to these other kinds of calculations. We do see some typical rates, and again, these are currently being inflated and changing as the market changes and competition for land changes, and certainly varies around the region of New England, and certainly even more so around the country or elsewhere, depending on where you're joining from. But in New England, we tend to kind of see these standard rates to a certain extent that can give us a kind of a ballpark to start negotiations for or with. But important to note that these are with raw land, without any infrastructure, without any huge amendments on them. So, it's a starting place, but I've seen plenty of exceptions to this. So from the other perspective, it can come down to, what does the landowner need? What do you need monetarily to make the arrangement work? And sometimes that's covering carrying costs of the entire property. Sometimes that's offsetting taxes. It's really your own calculation to figure out what the bottom line is that you need from the arrangement. And likewise, it comes down to what a tenant can afford. What is their business planning? What's their markets like, their scale? And so a lot of times, if either party has to step outside of what they truly need and what they can afford, it might not be the best arrangement. So there can often be a disconnect between the actual carrying cost of the land and what a farmer can afford in terms of rent. And we see that a bit, and it just takes open communication to try to get there. So quickly to wrap up the leasing piece, which there's plenty more to talk about on leasing, but we're trying to keep this brief overview. And if you have any questions, again, we're happy to engage with you further on this. But when people are negotiating leases, if you found a farmer and you're trying to figure out what the plan is, drilling down to specifics as best you can is really important. It's great to make sure that vision and goals and values align, but you also need to drill down into the specifics of what sort of farming is going to happen and what can and can't be done. And one of the ways we really recommend to do that is to use this plain language rough draft lease outline. We have some examples of if you have interest in that. Not getting bogged down in legal language yet, and trying to really focus on what is the arrangement and getting everybody to agree to it. At which point you can then work with some tools and outlines and templates to get it formalized in an actual legal format, and have an attorney give it a final stamp of approval. So using that, it can help both parties really hear each other, really think through and talk through things. And get an arrangement finalized that both parties feel good about, and then they can relax into, becoming friends or having a relationship as well as the farming itself happening. And those are all things that we're absolutely happy to help you work through. So conversely, sometimes when speaking with folks, and talking about their vision for their land, perhaps leasing isn't the right fit for you based on your goals and what you need. And so sometimes the other alternative can be hiring a manager for your land or your farm, depending on what you own, what your visions are. And it can have some of the same benefits of leasing, where you continue to own the land, it's getting managed, perhaps improved. But one of the big differences here is that with a hired manager, you have a lot more oversight and control of what happens on your land. If you have very specific visions for what you'd like to have happen, ways you'd like to do it, practices you'd like to explore, considering hiring someone that you can give them direction and tell them exactly what to do might be the best fit. Usually that person's not running their own business. They're a paid employee. And so it's somebody you need to manage and figure out, what you're going to pay them and how that compensation is going to work. But it's an important distinction between somebody that's leasing and running their own business and calling their own shots and has their own bottom line and their own way to pay themselves, versus someone that's being employed to execute your vision on the land. And so people can get into a little bit of trouble when they blur the line between those two things. Certainly, if you have a tenant, you can ask them to use specific practices, but it gets tricky if you have too much exact direction on what they do. And that's where we try to have people explore this hired manager role. But it means you have a labor cost. It means you're suddenly the buck stops at you with you being the owner of the land and the person hiring the manager. You need a lot of knowledge base and responsibility, and some people really thrive with that. Others, it might suddenly snowball into something that you weren't prepared to have to do a lot of research or answer a lot of questions. So these are all just things we try to help people think through when trying to figure out, do they, if they want to continue owning their land and making it available, is having a tenant, or is having a hired manager sort of a better fit for you and your land? Yeah, as we talked about, are you looking for oversight, land management, and income's a big question mark. I work with folks that sometimes say that their goal is really to try to make some income from the farming happening on their land, and just trying to charge a rental rate doesn't necessarily sit well with them. They think their lands could be productive for vegetables or some other high value crop, and trying to get income from it could be an important piece for them. Business planning with that is really important. And a lot of times it's a little bit difficult to try to have a hired manager and also make income from the farming happening on your farm, depending on what's happening there. And a lot of times, if that were the case, there would already perhaps be a farmer that would be interested in owning that piece of land or something similar to it, and running their own profitable business on it anyway. So often try to kind of at least encourage business planning and walk people through that piece of it. If having a hired manager to make income from your land, if you're not doing the farming yourself, is your goal. Great. I'll hand it over to Nikki for right now.
So yeah, hiring a farm manager, I think is a good segue into this idea of farm transfer, right? You may have heard of the terms farm transfer and farm succession, kind of be interchangeable, but quickly, farm succession refers to kind of the passing, of your farm and assets to your heirs who wish to continue farming, whereas farm transfer is finding that successor who's not an heir, but maybe that farm manager, or a beginning farmer couple. So to get into it just a bit, next slide, please. So I guess regardless of whether you're going to go through the pathway of succession or transfer, kind of just this bigger idea of your assets going to that next generation is a huge one. Not only are we talking about land and the business and equipment and these major pieces, but we're also talking about your next life chapter. Thinking through estate planning, your retirement needs. That's a whole nother ball of wax, I guess. And to be honest, this process usually takes about a few years. There's a lot of planning and resources that go into thinking through this transition. And because, this is such a complex process, we don't encourage you, the transfer to be a DIY. Instead, it's really essential to have a team who can advise you on best practices, put all of the paperwork in place, just to have this be successful and to ensure that smooth transition. So who's a part of this team? Well, usually, a farm business planner, maybe like myself or those at Land for Good, to guide everyone through this process. You can kind of think of us as your project manager. We can help explore options, help create and write out that transfer plan, and as best as we can resolve conflicts, because conflicts will come up. You'll definitely want to include your financial advisor or planner. I think even before making, the decisions about transferring assets, thinking through that investment, from maybe the sale of the farm or even dealing with debt that you still have, consulting your financial planner is a good idea. A lawyer, that's going to be kind of consistent through no matter what option you choose to offer up your land to farmers. In addition to drawing up the necessary legal paperwork, to transfer ownership, lawyers can provide that invaluable advice just about, legal implications. And they're also going to be the ones to help, update or even create, if you haven't yet, your estate planning documents. Including an accountant is also a very good idea. Simply put, different succession or transfer strategies, are going to have their different financial and tax implications. And a farm accountant should be, they should be the best ones to know how to handle this transaction with those taxes in mind. Someone that you may not think about right off the bat, your insurance agent, can give you that advice about different kinds of insurance, including life and, disability policies, when that comes to be factored in. And again, as I kind of alluded to, as much as, your farm planner or advisor can support in conflict resolution, sometimes mediation or other professionals need to, need to step in. I do see some comments rolling in, so I'll let Rachel or Jay speak to those if they need to be addressed now or later.
They're good questions.
Yeah.
Jay, do you want to field the question about how
Yeah,
people
sure.
can make sure that leases don't end up being exploitative, essentially?
Exactly. Yeah, no, that was a great question about how do we suggest that landowners handle hopes for labor or food in exchange for a farmland lease, instead of money. And yeah, the risk of it potentially leading to exploitation of a beginning farmer. So that's a great question. So when we're talking about rental rates and different ways that rent can be paid, sometimes doing an exchange of goods or services, either instead of cash rent or in addition to it, can definitely be used by folks. Examples that come to mind are providing a CSA share to the landowner or a couple, or with some of my hayfield leases, making sure that I brush hog or otherwise mow other areas that I'm not currently using. And the best advice we give on that is to attach a monetary value to it, even if there's not money exchanging hands, so that everybody understands the value of it. Using those CSA share examples, it can, or we're really trying to sidestep as a situation where both sides think they're doing the other one a favor. And, in that CSA share example, without talking about price, the landowner, can be feeling like, boy, I'm doing this farmer this huge favor, I'm providing the land and it's great, but, I'm really, providing them a favor, and sure, I get some vegetables out of it. But, and the farmer, meanwhile, is thinking, boy, the landowner doesn't seem to understand how many, hundreds of dollars worth of vegetables they're getting each year. And so I've seen situations deteriorate when both sides can kind of feel like the other one is, or feel like they're giving the other one a favor without having any kind of concrete thing to fall back on. So I'll leave that there, but it is a complex issue and just trying to make sure it's penciled out and understood by both parties.
All right. So just to continue with the farm transfer, great question. Just kind of the mechanics involved in it. There definitely isn't a one size fits all, right? But maybe just some general concepts or considerations that we can offer you today. A transfer tries to balance, many of, the nuances at play and just the individual circumstances on both sides of the table. And I would think that it is very important to, take a step back and assess everyone's goals and values. And, even thinking of financial and management capabilities. I think needing to be realistic of everyone's strengths and weaknesses is important. But then also to kind of extend that, being open to the new ideas that the entering farmer has under the new ownership, and being able to support that vision is important too. There are, again, many ways to do this, but there is one that's fairly common that we see over and over. It's using this LLC or limited liability company that you would know an LLC to be, kind of based farm transfer as the tool or mechanism of transferring, your assets. I won't go into too much of these details, but just generally, I'll give you, two advantages of having it to, starting up a separate LLC for this transfer, just that it allows for very flexible strategizing and that gradual transfer over time. And again, as much as I would love to spend literally the rest of the day talking about farm transfer and all the ways and how to do it, just reach out to, one of our organizations, we can help you give all the information and help you need. So, working with your farm business planners is a must. All right, land purchase. Then we have the traditional buy-sell transaction that we're all probably most familiar with. Again, I won't spend too much time on the logistics of selling your land, but again, I do want to comment on wanting to sell your land to a farmer. We do know of the high cost of farmland and the hardship as a farmer to qualify for a traditional bank mortgage loan as a barrier to farm ownership, especially for new farmers with limited capital or credit. So again, another theme. So you have this goal of wanting to support the next generation, right? That's up against wanting you to fully recoup your investment of, your land for your financial needs. And we talked a little bit about this last week too. So on the farmer side, the buyer side, There are a variety of governmental resources. We know of USDA, the Farm Service Agency, or FSA, that can provide some loans, for farmers that meet very specific requirements. It's not a guarantee if you're just a farmer, but if you do have a farmer going down this financing path, for you as a seller, I would just keep this in mind. That this process does take way longer than your traditional, sale on the open market. So, instead of that 30-day or 45-day, close that you would expect to put in your, purchase and sales agreement, just maybe extend that a little bit longer, because that would definitely make things easier for everyone in the long run. There's just a lot that goes into this process that's beyond even the farmer's control. And then you might have heard about conservation or agricultural easements as a way to, to help you and the farmer trying to purchase your land, make that purchase more affordable for them, to prepare you, best for retirement. Maybe there's some other value, based goals that you have of wanting to keep your farmland in farming. And then maybe as a farmer, you have, this idea of, keeping your legacy going, whether it's, in stewardship or, the farm business itself. It's a great option if those goals speak to you. And, again, without going into all the details of what a conservation easement is and, how to do it, I just wanted to spell kind of that one idea that, conserving your land, if you do go that route, you won't receive that fair market value for it as a seller. That is untrue to some degree. That land will still get appraised and combined with what that farm seeker will pay you to buy the land and what a land trust and organization would pay you to buy the conservation easement. Kind of those two in total would equal your property's fair market value at that time of appraisal. And again, I would say, working with farm business planners, advisors from the land trust or that organization in dealing with the conservation easements, and also that incoming farmer is key in that planning process, because again, there's just so many, pieces that need to be discussed and planned out. And it is a forever decision that stays with the property deed. And I think I'll just leave it there.
Thanks. Yeah, so sort of, spinning off of that are some other potential options, of making your land both available to farming and sort of, meeting some other goals you might have for the land. And so a couple different methods of that being gifting, donating, and rematriation. So these could fit into any of the strategies we already kind of discussed, and certainly into succession planning or otherwise having your land be utilized. So gifting in itself is usually, giving the land or some amount of the land to an individual or an entity. And it can be used a lot in farm succession planning, especially with a related party or somebody that, perhaps the legacy of the land as it was always handed down to the next generation. And that's going to continue depending on the financial needs of the current owners. Sometimes it's, gifted to an entity or something else. The big thing about gifting is that nothing is received in return. It's a gift that's freely given, but it can have conditions as far as what's done with the land or things like that, or ways in order for it to be accepted. And a big thing is that there can be tax implications for the recipient depending on the value of what's being gifted. So that's something that comes up a lot in succession and estate planning, but something to consider if you're a landowner that does want to consider giving your land to another cause, another entity. Similar to that is donating. It's sort of a, there's a little bit of nuance there. Very similar. Usually donating is, to a cause or an organization that believes specifically in that cause. There can be tax advantages to that donation for the person donating it. So certain kinds of donations can be tax deductible or tax write-offs. Certainly donating a conservation easement is one thing that can be done, really entirely depending on what your goals are, financial situation, that sort of thing. But it can be a tool in order to help make sure that the future of your land aligns with your values, and that the organization or whoever you're donating it to has a mission statement and a way to sort of get things solidified that, perhaps your legacy of what you'd like your land to be and what your land is can be seen into the future via a donation. Lastly is this idea of rematriation. And this is something that, is continuing to be explored. And there's, lots of work, lots of theorizing of ways to sort of look at past land injustices and figure out how to either return land outright or at least reintroduce, more culturally traditional uses, either through indigenous people or farmers of color or people of color having more access to land that, especially in this region, but across the country is predominantly white owned. So this can, have a bunch of different ways to do it. One is a simple invitation that people are welcome to access the land to do certain things, whether that's hunting, whether that's farming, whether that's doing, any sort of traditional things on your land that they've been barred from doing for quite a while. That could expand into cultural use agreements and getting something, clearly written out about ways that a certain group of people could access and utilize your land for something specific. A cultural easement is actually, like a conservation easement. It's something that could be attached to your land legally that once put on a certain group of people can, have the right to access your land or certain parts of your land to do certain things. And with all of this, it's really important to center that motivations matter behind this. People can get into kind of murky waters trying to figure out their reasoning and why they might want to make their land either available or returned to someone for particular use. And just trying to, do some deep introspective thinking about that and, recognize what your motivations are, if there's something in particular you're hoping to get out of it. It's all sort of part of a swirling matrix of decision making there. So, we're actually in the process of developing a landowner's guide to help think through and work on, some of this. And it's, something if you want to dive in more and learn more, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to, sort of help talk it through and plug you into various organizations that are, actively working on trying to implement some of these strategies. Let's see. Great. Well, I see a couple questions we'll definitely make some time for at the end too. Just want to make sure that we get through the next little bit and then we'll circle back around. So thanks.
So lastly on our agenda, group use. Many farmers are also exploring ways to farm together. Sometimes it's called collaborative farming or cooperative or collective farming, some of those terms that you're hearing. But just this idea of sharing resources and assets, equipment, land, that's not a new idea, right? Because the barrier of land access isn't new. Like we said, farmland is expensive to buy. Appropriate land and infrastructure for specific operations, hard to find, I would think. And then, even as much as we're, talking about leasing land, sometimes rented land can just be insecure because there's just that piece that you don't own it. And kind of on the social and kind of mental emotional side, just farming can be isolating doing it on your own. So pooling all these resources together and working together as farmers can help reduce these risks. So we get the question of, how can you support these farmers looking to farm together? We get asked a lot how to start or make your land available as an incubator farm. Incubators, yes, do help aspiring farmers, start, with less risk. This idea that if they succeed at the incubator, they can leave and find their own land and start their own business. But then I guess alternatively too, if a farmer decides that farming is not right for them while they're, kind of exploring the incubator space, they can walk away with minimal investment. And that's okay too. Farm incubators typically, provide farmers kind of a combination of resources. Again, there's that access to the affordable land piece, access to equipment and tools and infrastructure. Jay had mentioned greenhouses and hoop houses, but there is this mentorship and training piece, whether from you or experienced farmers. There's business planning support, there's access to, possibly established markets and help entering those. As you can see, this list is a lot and probably not even exhaustive. You know, and I'll say just providing that land base and wanting it to be a farm incubator is just not the end of the conversation, and part of that planning. You know, it, as you can imagine, takes a lot of investment and especially your time to make that just succeed for everyone. You know, but if you did want to just kind of take that pathway and provide just that land base as that landowner type arrangement, and you did want to support multiple farmers and or multiple operations on your land, again, you'll still just need that extensive planning piece to develop, as Jay went over, you know, the lease agreements, you know, ways to communicate expectations and logistics. It is more complex than just, you know, giving them the so-called keys to your property. So I guess if there's really, you know, any takeaway from all of this today, it's that reaching out to farm advisors and, you know, our organizations or local organizations doing the same work around you, you know, that can provide some of this direct service along with some of these, you know, informational workshops and resources that we can give you can really help you out. And I guess speaking of resources, you know, Jay, would you like to go over some of these resources we put together?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, all of our organizations, Land for Good, Intervale, you know, Maine FarmLink, Connecticut FarmLink, through, yeah, we basically try to help curate resources that can help point people in the right direction on a lot of these things. So a couple that I wanted to call out, and then I'll let Nikki talk about a few too. We have on our website, Land for Good, we have a whole series of toolboxes geared to different audiences. There's a whole one for landowners as well as for lease crafting and, you know, lease agreements. One resource that I lean on really heavily when people are thinking about leasing is our Elements of a Good Farm Lease guide that can really walk you through each of the different elements of a farm lease and help you figure out what applies to your situation and what doesn't. And we have some companion documents like lease outline templates and things that follow this same format and allow you to really get some ideas down on paper. You know, likewise, we've got similar resources in our toolbox for succession planning, for farm seekers themselves trying to find land, and lots of you know, lots of written guides for landowners helping to cover different aspects of making land available, including, you know, for municipalities and other organizations that might be landowners as well. So I always encourage people to look there, and if you know, if you feel at all overwhelmed with the resources there, I'm always happy to help curate things for you based on your you know, based on your situation and circumstances. Certainly want to call out the Build a Lease tool that we have on there also, just relative to leasing, that once you have an outline figured out and have an agreement figured out, it can be a great way to actually have some example lease language and have fill in the blanks and go through this tool and come out with a rough draft lease. Let's see, something else to call out too, just as you work through things in any of these aspects of land transfer. You know, there are wonderful agricultural mediation programs overseen by the USDA and operating in each state that can help negotiate or help facilitate communication, whether it's amongst the family, amongst the landowner and tenant. If things go awry in a certain arrangement, they can be really important folks to lean on to help, you know, to help clarify things and get parties to sort of communicate and perhaps hear each other again. Yeah, Nikki, I'll let you talk a little bit about some others too.
So that graphic of the farm purchase is just an example of, you know, one of the pieces of resources or just guidance that we team up with our local land trust, Vermont Land Trust, and just guiding farmers through that land or through that farm purchase. A lot of the time, you know, they're a new or beginning farmer trying to access land is their first experience, you know, with a mortgage. You know, they might even have questions of what is a mortgage. So just kind of walking through them the step-by-step, you know, pieces to that process. And then I will put a huge spotlight on Farm Commons. It's out of the Midwest. I think they're out of Minnesota, I believe, but they cover the whole country with help with, you know, walking farmers through their liabilities in terms of legal, insurance needs, you know, legal contracts, you name it. They're made up of a team of lawyers dedicated to helping farmers. There's a lot of great free resources on their website, as well as a membership base that, you know, opens you up to access to workshops and one-on-one assistance. So I'm just gonna give a shout out to Farm Commons.
Great. And if you have, again, specific questions for any particular resources you're looking for, definitely reach out to us and let's see if we can point you in the right direction, because luckily there's a lot out there and there's a lot of great organizations that are collaborating and trying to cover these different niches of helping people figure out these different options. Great. So we'll break for Q&A very shortly. I just know I think Rachel wanted to talk quickly about the next session and sort of the way this wraps up.
Thanks, folks. And Jay, if you just want to stop sharing your screen so more of us can see more of us. Just did want to thank folks for coming. It was great to see so many of you back again. A quick reminder that we're meeting one more time next week, same time, same place. And that session will be a live panel with some landowners and also some farm owners who acquired access to land from landowners. So you'll get a chance to hear from them about their experience and ask them questions directly. Just like last week, I'll send out a follow-up email after today's session with some resources. And if you haven't had a chance yet to fill out the evaluation form for this series, I just put the link in the chat. We'd love to hear from you how this session is going. And that link will also be available in the email that I send out. And then one last reminder, I think both Nikki and Jay mentioned that all of the organizations we told you about at the beginning, Land for Good and Connecticut FarmLink, Maine, they all offer direct technical assistance to folks who are looking for assistance with wading through some of these issues. So if you need help and you live in one of those states, feel free to reach out directly to that organization. And if you're looking for contacts in other states, you can send me an email. I may be able to give you a referral. So with that, I know there were quite a number of questions in the chat. And so I'll just scroll back through, but if people have questions and want to raise their hand or put them in the chat, you can of course continue to do that. So one person asked, Jay and Nikki, if any of us know how we could connect a potential buyer of farmland with a farmer, kind of like an investor sort of role. And if we don't know, where could they find information on that?
Sure. So I would certainly say, utilizing the various land linking services like this can definitely be a great way for someone to get in touch with a farmer. If you don't have a piece of land yet, and this is like you're looking to acquire land to then make available to a farmer, we're happy to talk with you basically and to try to help figure out different networks and offline strategies to find someone, as well as to think through, what are your motivations, sort of what are you hoping to get out of the arrangement, what level of potential partnership are you looking at? There can be, really great intentions with that and some kind of murky territory to just make sure that everybody's aware of as far as, what level of participation in the business that potential landowner or investor might be having. And certainly too, to make sure that someone's not accidentally competing with a farmer for that land as well. There can be some really best intentions for trying to acquire farmland to then make it available. That might also accidentally drive the cost of farmland up if a lot of folks do it. So it's a very, it's a complex thing to talk about that, I've seen it work really well in some situations and other times where a landowner can invest in a property and then, perhaps feel frustrated that they can't find the person they're looking for or can't quite make the numbers work the way they're looking to invest it. So, yeah, I guess in short, something we're happy to talk with you about and to help think through.
Yeah, I guess, working with a farm advisor with farmers, we definitely get those calls, whether from out of state wanting to be an investor or property and searching for that farmer. Those stories and those articles that you read about of kind of that, magical, mystical arrangement happening, we do get calls. So, working with a farm advisor or planner who just, fields those questions, but then also are on the ground, driving around the state, working with farmers, knowing the farm properties, knowing the farm seekers. That's probably a good first call.
Thanks. Someone else wanted to know, where would landowners and farmers address liability concerns in terms of accidents or damage or personal injury Do you have anything specific just beyond this is covered through insurance?
Yeah, I mean, so in insurance and making sure that the insurance is, stipulated, say in a lease or another arrangement happening. If you have a farming tenant, it's very common, if not just about always required, to make sure the farming tenant has their own liability insurance and that your property's named, that that it's very clear that anything happening from their farming falls on them. Same thing with other types of use agreements, and just making sure that that it's stipulated that either that whoever's accessing and using the property has their own insurance, or perhaps if you're looking at some of the other things like rematriation and other sorts like that, that you just have adequate liability insurance to cover somebody else, whether it be classified as recreation or something else happening on your property. So that's a great question. It's very common to make sure that's covered, but it's something you absolutely want to make sure is stipulated.
Do either of you have any advice for someone who might be considering making their land available to a farm incubator program?
Sure, we can go offline. You can contact me at the Intervale Center. We did years ago run an incubator program that has transitioned into, now we're more of a landlord-tenant relationship with some perks, but reach out to organizations who have had experiences with that, the Intervale Center being one of them.
Yeah, I'd definitely echo that. There's a lot of great organizations, especially around New England, but definitely around the country too, that have been working as incubators. Sometimes they enter that intentionally as their mission. Other times they sort of stumble into it because they realize they have a property, multiple people who are interested. So there's lots of different ways incubators can run, and there's lots of really, really great examples. And all the ones I'm aware of are happy to talk to folks about how that works, and whether that's them lending their own consulting advice on how to set something up, or even help to manage an additional property, or at least help someone explore how to get something like that started.
What other questions can we answer for folks?
Let's see.
I think we've got all the ones in the chat.
I think I may have seen one about asking about fee for our services. It's for free for farmers. So that is also a great perk.
Yeah, that's a huge asset up in Vermont, which we're grateful to be able to lean on. And with Land for Good, we can offer up to 2 hours of no cost help for folks, which, is often plenty of times to have a couple phone calls, really try to help get people on the right path, share some resources, give feedback on leases, that sort of thing. And if somebody, wants additional help beyond that, there's sometimes grant funding or other things we can tap into from other organizations, or, we can do a fee for service contract with a sliding scale. But basically, it's just about trying to get people the help that they need and help get people on the right path. Thanks for asking that, though. That's really important.
Great. Well, thanks for joining, folks. Please don't hesitate to contact any of us directly by email, and be on the lookout in your inboxes for that follow-up tomorrow. So thanks so much for being here.